Officer Lucius Harmon considered himself untouchable. He'd been on the Millburn City Police Force for 11 years, rising from a rookie in a small-town precinct to a decorated sergeant with near-absolute control over his district. Everyone said he was the people's protector, but the real truth hid behind hush money and sealed files. Harmon had a simple mandate: keep the locals scared, the politicians paid, and the paperwork spotless. It worked perfectly, for years. Every business paid its share, every complaint vanished, every inconvenient witness was shut down. Yet for all his careful planning, for every bribe and blackmailed favor, Harmon never thought one quiet, unassuming day at a local diner would detonate his entire career. But that morning, in front of 2 stunned waitresses and 1 startled cook, a teenage girl refused to hand over her brother's phone to a pair of officers who demanded it without cause. They retaliated. She was slammed to the floor, handcuffed, tears staining the greasy linoleum as they hauled her away. And that, Officer Harmon would soon discover, was the single worst mistake of his life. Because the girl's aunt wasn't just some concerned relative. She was Master Sergeant Ebony E.J. Hayes, the most lethal Green Beret sniper in American history, a legend in classified halls and clandestine briefings. A ghost who could sight in at 1,000 yards without blinking. The next phone call that battered diners saw wasn't to a family lawyer, it was to E.G., and when a highly decorated special operations soldier comes home to find her niece brutalized by corrupt cops, the entire precinct is about to learn what it truly means to fear a weapon trained on them. In Millburn, justice isn't just coming, it's already here. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. She arrived in Millburn after midnight, driving an old pickup truck that belied her skill set. Built tall and lean with the streamlined muscle of a career soldier, Ebony Hayes carried herself with an air that radiated calm authority. Her hair was cropped close, and a single scar above her right eyebrow offered a faint hint to the life she'd once led. Deep reconnaissance missions in foreign deserts, silent takedowns in mountaintop villages. Officially, she had retired 2 years ago to help her ailing mother in Florida. Unofficially, she was still on numerous watch lists around the globe. One of the most feared names whenever a high-value target ended up on the wrong end of a bullet from half a mile away. But she hadn't come back to Millburn to wage a personal war. She wanted only one thing: to protect her 16-year-old niece, Tiana Hayes, who had been thrown into a cell on trumped-up charges, battered by the hands of men in uniform who believed they could do whatever they wanted. Ebony had read the arrest report, drenched in lies about resisting arrest, interfering with a police investigation, assaulting an officer. She knew better. Tiana was gentle, the kind who always asked permission before petting someone's dog, who volunteered at the local retirement home. But these cops, hungry for power and unstoppable in their arrogance, had singled her out as a convenient scapegoat. In the hush of pre-dawn, Ebony parked 2 blocks from the police station, her heart a steady drumbeat echoing in her ears. She had been part of operations with far higher stakes, embassy extractions, hostage rescues in foreign territories, yet never had her pulse hammered this hard. Tiana was family. The fear wasn't for Ebony's own life, but for the damage already done to someone she loved. She slipped from the truck and moved through the dimly lit streets, each step purposeful, measured. The station sat at the corner of Main and Willow. Warm yellow light spilled through the glass doors, illuminating a small lobby with wooden benches and a bored-looking desk officer. Ebony paused in the shadows across the street, mentally mapping the layout she'd gleaned from county records. She had no illusions about rescuing Tiana at gunpoint tonight. No, she needed a plan, and that required information. Ebony was no impulsive vigilante. She was a strategist. At precisely 4 a.m., she glided around the back of the station, ignoring the glare of flickering floodlights. She used a slim lockpick to pop the back fence's worn chain, careful not to leave marks. She made her way to an external maintenance door. County budgets often left certain corners overlooked. Ebony had bet on it, and she was right. The alarm system was painfully out of date. A few minutes with her phone-based hacking kit, and the door clicked open. She entered a cramped storage closet reeking of bleach and stale water, then crouched behind tall shelves, listening for movement. The corridor beyond was quiet. She heard no footsteps, no voices. Perfect. Ebony slipped out and used a small fiber-optic camera under each door to check for occupants. Most rooms were empty. In the station's modest tech office, she found a single occupant, a tired administrative clerk slumped over the desk. Ebony's infiltration training told her exactly how to proceed. She slipped inside, calm as a winter breeze, and placed a single-gloved hand over the man's mouth while simultaneously pressing a stun gun to his side. He jerked, eyes bulging, but made no sound. "I won't hurt you," Ebony whispered, so quietly he almost didn't hear her. "But if you alert anyone, you'll regret it. Nod if you understand." He nodded, sweat shining on his forehead. He nodded, sweat shining on his forehead. He smelled of coffee and cheap deodorant. Ebony withdrew the stun gun, keeping it visible, then tied his wrists with a zip tie. She guided him gently to the floor. From the corner of her eye, she could see the row of servers and the main computer that likely stored local data. She rifled through the half-eaten burrito on the desk to retrieve his ID card. Then she slid the rolling chair closer to the computer. "I need you to log in," she said, offering the ID card back. "No alarm, no silent triggers, or you're out. Got it?" The man, his name tag reading R. Lawson, nodded frantically. With trembling fingers, he keyed in credentials. Ebony watched carefully for any attempt to slip in a code or press a hidden panic button. Lawson was too terrified to try. Within seconds, Ebony gained access. She typed away, hooking a small USB device to copy records, especially anything related to recent arrests, and there it was, Tiana's file, sealed with unusual speed for a minor. Ebony also grabbed shift rosters, patrol logs, evidence logs, every digital breadcrumb that might reveal the extent of corruption here. "Where is she?" Ebony murmured, scanning the data. Her gaze hardened when she found Tiana's mugshot, the bruises visible on her face. Charges included resisting arrest and suspected narcotics possession. Ebony's teeth ground. Tiana wouldn't touch narcotics if her life depended on it. Ebony scrolled further. The hearing was scheduled for Monday, 3 days away. Meanwhile, Tiana was locked in a holding cell. Ebony read the presence of a certain Sergeant Lucius Harmond on the paperwork, referencing him as the arresting officer. Her stomach clenched. Then, as she scanned a second file, Ebony realized Tiana wasn't the only questionable arrest. Over the last year, dozens of similar charges had been filed against young men and women, mostly from the lower in-pouched outskirts of Millburn. Lawson sat petrified. Ebony inserted a second device, downloading system logs. She gleaned as many details as she could, images of the station's blueprint, evidence vault records. Her sharp eyes recorded every line of text. She didn't have time to review it fully right now, but she'd analyze it later in a safer place. Then she carefully turned to Lawson again. She pressed a finger to her lips, then brought the stun gun's tip close enough for him to see. "When I leave," she whispered, "forget I was here. If you do anything else, I'll know." His rapid nodding told her he understood. Ebony sighed inwardly. Part of her despised terrifying a probably underpaid clerk, but Tiana's safety came first. She used the ID card to open a locked interior door, stepping into another hallway. If possible, Ebony wanted a glimpse of Tiana to ensure she was alive, or at least uninjured, beyond what the booking photo showed. But Ebony's infiltration instincts warned her time was short. Day shift officers would start arriving soon. She risked it anyway, creeping down the corridor. She found the holding cells, separated from the rest of the station by a thick steel door. A camera perched overhead. Ebony smirked. After her years in covert ops, a single camera was child's play. She aimed a miniature IR disruptor at the lens, freezing the feed in an endless loop of the empty hallway. Then she used Lawson's card to slip inside. Through the narrow window, Ebony saw 4 holding cells. One of them, near the end, had a figure curled on the small bunk. Ebony's heart jumped when she recognized Tiana's curly hair. She stepped lightly toward the bars, the hush broken only by Tiana's ragged breathing. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an ugly glow. For a long moment, Ebony just stood there, letting her chest unclench at seeing Tiana was indeed alive, though battered. "Tiana?" Ebony whispered. She tapped the bars gently. Her niece stirred, lifting her head slowly. The second recognition struck Tiana's eyes. She scrambled upright. "Aunt A?" she mouthed. Ebony didn't speak. She pressed a finger to her lips, then pointed at the cameras overhead. Tiana's lip was split, and Ebony's rage flared white-hot. She forced herself to remain calm. With no guard in sight, Ebony's hands itched to break open the lock, scoop Tiana up, and vanish into the night. But Ebony wasn't naive. If they disappeared now, the entire precinct would mount a manhunt. Tiana would be labeled a fugitive. They needed a legal route, or at least something that looked legitimate from the outside. Ebony shot Tiana a reassuring look and gently placed her palm against the metal bars. Tiana pressed her own hand there, fighting tears. In that moment, Ebony vowed she'd burn Milburn's entire corrupt system to ashes if it meant freeing Tiana. But for now, Ebony had to go. The plan needed more than raw emotion. She tapped her watch, indicating she'd be back soon, then blew Tiana a silent kiss before slipping away. Tiana's eyes glistened with relief and sorrow all at once. Ebony made her exit, the corridor still quiet. She made sure to restore the camera feed in the hallway so no suspicion would arise too soon. The clerk was still lying on the office floor, trembling. Ebony gave him a final warning glance and left him there, returning outside the way she came. Once in the alley, she vanished into the early morning darkness, as though she'd never been there at all. That morning, Ebony drove to an old friend's place, a battered warehouse near the train tracks, once used as a mechanical shop for freight engines. Its occupant, Dr. Simone Carter, was a retired Army medic Ebony had served with. They'd parted ways after a messy operation overseas, but Ebony knew Simone never truly left the service mindset. She ran a volunteer clinic under the radar for folks who couldn't afford hospital bills. Ebony also knew Simone was the best person to patch up Tiana if things got worse. Simone answered the door with a suspicious glare until she recognized Ebony. "You. God, it's been how many years? 4? 5, Ebony corrected softly, stepping inside. The place smelled of sterilizing solutions and coffee. "I need your help." Simone's eyes flickered. She always could read Ebony like a chart. "Medical?" "Maybe soon," Ebony said, "but right now it's about my niece. She's locked up at the station on bogus charges, roughed up. I need information, resources, and a safe place if things go south." Simone sighed heavily, pushing back her short dreadlocks. "Girl, you always did like to roll in with guns blazing." Ebony gave a tight smile. "I'm trying to do this smart, but I have to get her out, legally if possible. If not, I'll do what I must." Simone's expression turned grim. "You've got that look in your eye again." "Yes, because those cops must be brought down. I don't want to do it halfway." Ebony handed Simone a flash drive containing the station data. "Help me sift through this. I need to see if Tiana has any chance of a fair hearing, or if we're dealing with something bigger than a few crooked cops." They spent hours in front of Simone's older model laptop, combing through arrest records, suspicious budgets, and references to sealed cases. Ebony's anger simmered as they uncovered name after name, working-class residents, many of them young, targeted for petty or fabricated offenses, large sums from local businesses quietly funneled to the Police Benevolent Fund, judges who ruled swiftly against defendants whenever Officer Harmond or his cronies were involved. It painted a picture of deep rot in Milburn, going back years. Tiana was just the latest victim. Mid-afternoon, Ebony's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She glanced at Simone. "I'll take it outside." She stepped into the wide corridor, pressed accept. "Hello?" A low voice responded. "Been a while, Hayes." Her heart clenched. "Colonel?" "Ex-Colonel now," came the reply. "We need to talk. I've heard some chatter that a certain retired sniper's stirring trouble in Milburn." Ebony's muscles tensed. Colonel Jacob Braddock had once been her commanding officer. She owed him her life after an IED nearly took her leg. She'd never expected him to call again, especially about local police corruption. She forced calm. "It's personal, Colonel. Just dealing with some scumbags." Braddock sighed. Personal becomes professional when men like Lucius Harmon get backers from above. You think he's just a local cop? His connections are bigger than you realize. Trust me, Hayes. You don't want to stand alone on this. "Let me help." Ebony almost refused out of reflex. She was used to solving problems alone. But if Braddock was right, if Officer Harmon had ties beyond Milburn, this was more than a local issue. "I'll be in contact," she said finally. She hung up, lips pressed tight. Ebony had no illusions that Braddock or any official channel might waltz in and fix everything. Still, she'd weigh every option. Tiana's life was worth any alliance, however uncertain. Over the next days, Ebony systematically mapped out her plan. First, she hired a local lawyer, Geraldine Hunt, known for being a thorn in the side of crooked institutions. Ebony suspected the local judge would block motions or deny bail, but she wanted to show she wasn't backing down. Next, she arranged a discreet meeting with a local investigative reporter named Darius Knight, whose articles had exposed city council bribery the previous year. Darius had faced intimidation by the same circle Ebony was now confronting. He had been forced to stop short of bigger revelations, but Ebony suspected he'd be hungry for the truth. They met at an all-night diner on the outskirts of town. Ebony wore a baseball cap pulled low, scanning the lot for watchers before sliding into the booth across from Darius. He was a tall man, late 30s, dark eyes shadowed by exhaustion, his left wrist in a brace, likely from an accident that Ebony guessed was no accident. "I know who you are," Darius said after a moment of tense silence. "I've heard rumors in the military crowd." He didn't elaborate. Ebony nodded. "And you're after Harmon?" "I'm after all of them," Ebony corrected. "But yes, starting with Harmon. He beat my niece. She's only 16, locked away on false charges." Darius's jaw clenched. "I warned folks about him. They called me paranoid. The mayor's in on it, some city council members too. Good luck cracking that shell." "I tried, ended up in the hospital." Ebony slid a small flash drive across the table. "Here's evidence. If something happens to me, I want you to run it. Publish everything. You can verify it first. It'll show what they've done. The money, the false arrests, all of it." Darius stared at it, uncertainty warring with the journalist's burning sense of justice. "They'll come after me again. Hard." "They will," Ebony agreed quietly. "But you already know what's right." She swallowed. "Look, I can't promise you safety, but I can promise these bastards will be too busy with me to focus on you, at least for a while." Darius exhaled, then nodded. He pocketed the drive. "All right, Ms. Hayes. I'm in. If they come for me, I'll make sure the story drops anyway, but I can't just release it now. We need a bigger moment, something that catches them off guard, or the evidence vanishes in a day." Ebony approved. "You're thinking strategically. Good. Keep your head down. I'll let you know when to strike." They parted ways. Ebony stepped into the night air, her mind whirling with possibilities. She felt a pulse of fear. She was putting others at risk. But Tiana was running out of time. Ebony had discovered Tiana's hearing date got mysteriously moved up. Now only a day away. Ebony suspected that if Tiana was formally convicted, she'd vanish into the juvenile system, or get transferred to a facility beyond Ebony's reach. The next morning, Ebony marched straight to the county courthouse. She wore a crisp blazer over her usually casual attire, her posture rigid with military discipline. She sat in the audience, watching as Tiana's case was called. Tiana was led in, wrists cuffed, lips trembling. Ebony's blood boiled at the sight, but she forced composure. Lawyer Geraldine Hunt rose to argue Tiana's innocence, pointing out the blatant inconsistencies in the arresting officer's report. Across the room, Ebony spotted Sergeant Harmon leaning against the wall, arms folded, a smug grin curving his lips. Tiana caught Ebony's eye. The judge, a short, balding man named Langsley, looked bored as Geraldine spoke. Then the prosecutor insisted Tiana had interfered with an ongoing narcotics operation and tried to assault an officer with a concealed weapon. Ebony clenched her fists under the table. Lies. Tiana possessed no weapon. Ebony's heart hammered as she realized the whole proceeding was a farce. Miss Hayes, Judge Langsley intoned, these charges are serious. Given the evidence presented by Sergeant Harmond, I'm inclined to consider juvenile detention pending trial. Ebony felt the words like a physical blow. The judge intended to lock Tiana away without bail. Geraldine fought back, citing Tiana's spotless record. Your Honor, this is a child who's never had so much as a parking ticket. We request a proper investigation into the use of force during her arrest. The judge's thin lips curved down. Request denied. This hearing is to address probable cause. There is substantial evidence of wrongdoing on Ms. Hayes' part. Bail is denied. Next case. Tiana let out a sob, tears brimming. Ebony stood abruptly, ready to speak, but the judge waved dismissively. Sit down, Ms. Hayes, or I'll have you removed. Ebony's entire body trembled with fury. She locked eyes with Harmond, whose smirk only widened. Forcing herself to remain within the bounds of law, for the moment, Ebony pivoted, walking out. She needed air, needed to think. She was no stranger to infiltration or rescue, but Tiana's fate was pinned under a gavel. Ebony stormed onto the courthouse steps, refusing to let despair take over. She inhaled the crisp morning breeze, inhaled and exhaled, recalling every tactical lesson. When pinned, you find another flank. As Ebony paced, she became aware of a figure approaching. Colonel Braddock. He wore a civilian suit, hair graying at the temples. She glared. What are you doing here? He shrugged. Trying to help. I told you Harmon's bigger than you realize. My sources indicate an entire web of power, and it goes beyond the local city lines. Some well-placed figures in the state capital rely on this pipeline of arrests for their private prison shares, among other shady dealings. This is organized corruption. Ebony's eyes narrowed. You come with proof? Braddock handed her a slim folder. A snippet, enough to show that if you keep pushing, you'll be stepping on some powerful toes, but you also might bring them down. Ebony scanned the documents. Bank transfers, property links, a chain of command that led to a shadowy figure, known only by initials. JS or GS. The letters were smudged. Ebony's mind reeled. And you want what? To see justice done, Braddock said simply. You're not the only one who hates bullies in uniform. Ebony weighed his words. Trust was dangerous, but Tiana's predicament demanded allies. All right, Colonel, then let's coordinate, because I'm about 5 minutes away from busting my niece out of that station by force. He almost smiled. Let's not do that just yet. If we can gather enough evidence, a higher authority can intervene. You'll free Tiana without turning the town into a war zone. She hesitated, the soldier in her wanting immediate results. But the rational part recognized that starting a firefight in the local jail might condemn Tiana as an accessory in the public eye. Ebony nodded. I need your intel. We need a plan. Back at Simone's warehouse, Ebony introduced Braddock to Simone. Tension crackled. Simone hadn't forgotten how the army leadership sometimes sacrificed soldiers in unwinnable missions. Yet they found common ground in protecting Tiana and exposing this ring. Ebony spread out maps of Milburn, location markers on the station, courthouse, the rumored stash houses that local officers controlled. This is bigger than Harmond, Ebony said grimly, pointing to Braddock's folder. We have infiltration across multiple city departments, a system that profits off false arrests, stuffed into privately run juvenile and adult facilities. Braddock leaned in. We have to make them overreach. Force them into a mistake that we can broadcast publicly. Once it's exposed on a massive scale, the state or federal level can't ignore it. They'll have to take action. Ebony considered. We can use Tiana's situation as the spark. If we can gather enough voices, families of other victims, local businesses that have been forced to pay protection money, we might create a media storm. And if that fails? Simone asked quietly. Then we'd do it my way, Ebony replied, eyes cold. All of them understood what her way meant. Ebony had the skills to vanish in the night and systematically dismantle the ring, one bullet at a time. But that was a last resort. Innocent people could get caught in the crossfire. They began with phone calls and quiet meetings, tapping Ebony's knowledge of infiltration to gather testimonies from those who'd been victimized. Some were reluctant, fearful of retaliation. Ebony used the data she'd stolen from the station, showing them that they weren't alone, that the corruption was widespread. Darius Knight covertly recorded interviews. Old Mr. Callahan from the grocery store tearfully recalled how Harmon demanded a monthly safety fee, or else the store got random visits from the health inspector, always culminating in punitive fines. A single mother named Renee lost custody of her children because her arrest for drug possession disqualified her from a stable job. Though, Ebony's files proved the drugs had been planted. The more Ebony uncovered, the more fury coiled in her gut. Meanwhile, Tiana's court date loomed for official arraignment. Ebony worried about Tiana's psychological state. She sent Simone to check on Tiana in the holding area under the pretext of a mandated medical check. Simone emerged with updates that Tiana's injuries were healing, but her spirit was precarious. 4 nights before the arraignment, Ebony was returning to Simone's warehouse when she felt a prickle of awareness. She parked 2 blocks away and walked carefully. Something was off. She circled behind a neighboring building, peering through a dusty second-floor window. Sure enough, a black SUV idled outside Simone's place, tinted windows concealing whoever was inside. Ebony's blood ran cold. The watchers had found them. Pulling out her phone, Ebony dialed Simone's private line. No answer. Ebony gritted her teeth. Maybe Simone was in trouble. She slipped around the rear of the building, scaling a rusted fire escape that led to Simone's second-floor storage area. The window lock gave way under her practiced hands. She crept inside, her footsteps silent on the old wooden boards. She heard muffled voices below. An imposing figure in plain clothes was in the main open area, scanning Simone's medical equipment. Ebony glimpsed Simone standing with arms raised, an expression of masked fury on her face. Ebony recognized the intruder's stance. He had that upright posture of special training, possibly ex-military. Another man rummaged through the makeshift office where Ebony's own gear had been stored. Ebony's heart hammered. She needed to protect Simone but also avoid revealing her presence. Simone's voice was low but angry. "I've told you, I don't know where Ebony Hayes is. You're violating my property." "Stop with the bravado," the lead man growled. "We know Hayes is around, stirring trouble. We just want to talk." He shot Simone a chilling grin. "If she doesn't show soon, we might have to bring you in for questioning. Interfering with law enforcement can be a serious offense." Law enforcement? Ebony's fury rose. These men had no badges displayed. They were the typical brand of covert muscle that corrupt cops or their higher-ups hired. Ebony's mind raced. She needed to neutralize them swiftly. From her vantage, she saw the second man rummaging in a trunk that contained Ebony's infiltration tools. He withdrew Ebony's custom rifle scope, turning it over curiously. Enough was enough. Ebony quietly unholstered a tranquilizer gun, non-lethal, fitted with darts that induced unconsciousness. She carried it for situations exactly like this, not wanting to rack up a body count that would complicate Tiana's case. She took aim at the rummaging man first. The dart whispered through the air, striking him in the neck. He jerked, dropping the scope with a clatter, then collapsed. "Hey!" The lead man whirled, yanking a sidearm from his belt. Simone dove behind a metal table as Ebony flipped over the railing, landing in a crouch. She fired the second dart, just as the man squeezed his trigger. The shot went wide, pinging off the concrete floor. He stumbled, blinking in shock as the tranquilizer took effect. He dropped heavily. Simone emerged from cover, panting. "Good Lord, EJ, I almost had a heart attack." Ebony hustled to lock the doors and check the men's pockets. She found no official IDs, just burner phones. The second man was bigger, with a shaved head and a scar over one brow. Ebony recognized the hallmark of a certain private security outfit that recruited ex-military types. So, Colonel Braddock's warning was accurate. These people were well connected. Simone folded her arms. "We have to get rid of them before they wake up." "Agreed." Ebony eyed the bigger man. I'll stash them in the back with enough sedation to keep them out until morning. Then I might feed some intel to Darius or the FBI, see if we can't link them to Harmon or someone higher. Simone's lips thinned. That's playing with fire. Ebony nodded grimly. We're already in the blaze. They bound the intruders with heavy-duty zip ties and stashed them in an old soundproof storage area. Ebony took photos of their faces, the weapons, anything that might be used as evidence. She also found a sheet of paper in one man's jacket, with Ebony's photo and Tiana's name circled in red. Ebony's gut twisted. They clearly intended to use Tiana as leverage if Ebony didn't comply or vanish. When the men were secured, Ebony turned to Simone. Pack up everything. This place isn't safe anymore. Simone nodded, eyes glimmering with anger. Where do we go? Ebony considered. She thought of Colonel Braddock's mention of safe houses. Despite her reservations, Ebony realized they needed a fallback. I'll call Braddock. He might have a secure location. Within an hour, Ebony and Simone had loaded essential equipment into Ebony's truck. Ebony destroyed the laptop's hard drive after copying critical files to multiple encrypted USB sticks. Then she made the call. Braddock answered, sounding tense. Figured you'd ring sooner or later. Heard about some folks sniffing around the city. They found us, Ebony said curtly. We need a safe place. Temporarily. Braddock hesitated. There's an abandoned army facility outside Milburn, officially closed last year. I can have an ally meet you there with keys. You sure you want me involved? Ebony glanced at Simone, who sat in the passenger seat. We're out of options, and Tiana's hearing is in less than 72 hours. We can't keep playing hide-and-seek. All right, Braddock said. I'll text you the coordinates. When Ebony ended the call, Simone frowned. You trust him? Ebony started the ignition. Trust is a strong word, but I believe he wants to stop what's happening as much as we do. They drove through back roads, turning onto an old highway that cut through farmland. The wind whistled in the darkness, the moon half hidden by clouds. Simone glanced in the side mirror, watchful for tail car. Ebony kept her sniper-honed eyes on the surroundings. It felt eerily like driving through a war zone, scanning for ambushes. After an hour, they reached a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. A single gate hung open. Ebony guided the truck onto a cracked asphalt lot. Buildings loomed in the gloom, silent reminders of an era when the army presence in small towns was more common. Under a flickering lamppost, a tall man in a worn jacket awaited them. Ebony cut the engine, stepping out slowly, one hand near her holstered sidearm. Simone followed suit. The man, who introduced himself as Reed, nodded curtly. The colonel said you'd come. I've got a generator running inside, place is off-grid, no official records that it's still operational. For now, anyway. Ebony sized him up. He seemed ex-military as well, the way he carried himself. Thank you. She didn't elaborate. Reed led them into a large garage converted into a makeshift safe house. Lights buzzed overhead as the generator hummed. The interior had cots, a folding table, maps pinned to walls, a radio setup that looked surprisingly robust for an abandoned site. Ebony felt a flicker of relief, some semblance of security at last. They spent the night scanning additional intel, cross-referencing with Braddock's folder. Everything pointed to a broader conspiracy that fed on small-town corruption, arresting low-level offenders, often innocent, for inflated charges, funneling them through a private corrections system that churned out profits. Harmon was a cog, but a powerful one. Ebony's unstoppable anger simmered just beneath her stoic exterior. As dawn approached, Ebony dozed off in a metal folding chair, the day's tension sapping her strength. She drifted into half-dreams of battlefields overseas, dust storms, the stench of gunpowder, only to wake with a start at the memory of Tiana's frightened eyes. She checked her watch. They had 2 days before Tiana's official arraignment. Ebony intended to be there, evidence in hand, or to blow the entire system wide open first. Mid-morning, Braddock arrived in an unmarked sedan. Ebony greeted him with caution. He told her the timing was perfect. Certain state-level officials, alerted by Ebony's lawyer's persistent filings, were scheduling a preliminary review of Tiana's arrest. Ebony's eyebrows shot up. They actually responded? The right pressure in the right place, Braddock said. Now, we need something big enough to prove they can't ignore the corruption. That's your moment. Ebony nodded. We've got files, testimonies, but it's not enough. They'll say they're fabricated. We need a smoking gun. Like the two goons who tried to raid Simone's place, Ebony said. If we can tie them to Harmond, or to the judge, or to bigger fish, that might do it. Braddock nodded slowly. They're no doubt ex-military, possibly from a private contractor. Let me see if we can ID them through some Army intelligence contacts. As Braddock stepped aside to make calls, Ebony prepared her own plan. She'd go back into the police station that night, retrieve actual video footage of Tiana's arrest if it still existed. She'd seen references to dash cams. If she could find a record of that diner assault, it would slam shut any debate about Tiana's innocence. Ebony recognized the risk. Security would be tighter. But every infiltration skill she possessed told her it was possible. When Ebony confided her plan to Simone, the medic frowned. That place is swarming with cops day and night. If they catch you, you'll be locked up or worse. I've done worse, Ebony said quietly, thinking of black ops missions behind hostile lines. I can handle them. So that night, Ebony once again donned dark clothing and her infiltration gear. She rigged her hair under a black cap, ensuring no stray piece was visible. She drove a different route, switching cars with one Simone borrowed from a friend. By midnight, Ebony stood in a deserted alley behind the police station. She paused, scanning for changes since her last infiltration. Indeed, they had installed a new camera by the back fence. Ebony smiled humorously, raising a small directional microwave device that momentarily jammed the feed. She scaled the fence in one fluid motion. Inside, Ebony found the same maintenance door, but this time it had a heavier lock. She took out a specialized pick and an override device. Sweat beaded her forehead. The device beeped once, then the door clicked open. She slipped into the narrow corridor. Tension prickled. The memory of Tiana's beaten face spurred her forward. She avoided the server room, suspecting they'd changed passcodes. Instead, Ebony headed for the main evidence locker, where dashcam footage might be archived. She used a fiber optic cable to peek under the door leading to a storeroom. She saw one bored officer, a rookie by the look of him, flipping through a phone. Ebony eased the door open a crack. She tossed a small object that rolled under a desk, emitting a faint hiss. The rookie frowned, stood, then swayed, eyes fluttering. He collapsed, stunned by a mild incapacitating gas Ebony had acquired from old Army contacts. She hurried in, stepping over the unconscious man, and plugged into the computer terminal. She typed rapidly, scanning for the diner incident. Her heart pounded when she found references to a dashcam _551 video. Ebony began copying it onto her flash drive. The progress bar inched forward, each second feeling like an hour. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Ebony froze, tension coiling in her muscles. She prayed the incapacitating gas wouldn't drift into the corridor. The footsteps paused right outside. Ebony's breath caught. Then a voice mumbled something about coffee, moving on. She exhaled silently and watched the final bits of data transfer. Done. She withdrew the drive, tucked it into a hidden pocket. She heard muffled voices from the corridor, possibly a shift change. Ebony had what she needed, but she was pinned. She slipped behind a tall metal cabinet, flattening herself. Two officers entered the storeroom, talking in low, casual tones. One noticed the unconscious rookie and swore. The other barked, "Johnson, what the hell?" Ebony bit her lip. She needed to slip away, but the men were blocking the door, kneeling over the rookie. Ebony risked inching along the side. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. One officer started rummaging in a first aid kit. The other stepped right past Ebony's hiding spot, just inches away. Ebony slid a small mirror from her pocket to see if they had guns drawn. They were too preoccupied with reviving their colleague. This was her chance. She crouched and made a silent dash back through the door. The corridor was empty. She took off at a near run, careful not to make noise. Down the hall, Ebony spotted a pair of officers rounding a corner. She ducked into an adjacent office and pressed against the wall. The footsteps passed. Ebony forced down panic. She was almost out. Finally, she reached the back exit. She repeated the jamming for the camera, cracked the door, and slipped into the alley. Free. In the safety of Simone's borrowed car, Ebony's entire body trembled from the adrenaline overload. She jammed the key into the ignition and pulled away, heart hammering. She had the dash cam footage, proof that Tiana had been assaulted for simply refusing to hand over her brother's phone. This had to blow the case open. Unless the city was so far gone that no evidence mattered, Ebony refused to let that doubt hold her back. Tiana would be vindicated. At the safe house, Ebony plugged the flash drive into a laptop. Simone, Braddock, and Reed gathered around. The footage was as damning as Ebony hoped. Tiana standing near the diner counter, the two cops demanding her phone. When she asked, "What's the charge?" they shoved her violently. She never raised a hand. Harmon appeared halfway through, delivering a savage blow with his baton. The camera's audio picked up Tiana's scream, the officer's harsh laughter. Simone's hands shook. "This is monstrous." "Exactly what we need," Ebony said. "I'll forward this to Geraldine, my attorney, and to Darius Knight. Tomorrow, Tiana's arraignment might shift if this is presented in open court. Everyone can see the real story." Braddock frowned. "Don't underestimate them. They'll try to spin it. They'll say Tiana was resisting. The footage is out of context." Ebony's eyes flashed. "The footage is time-stamped. The audio is clear. They can't bury it so easily." He nodded. "Then let's make sure it's backed up in 100 places. And I'll call in some old favors from the State Bureau. If the right channels see it, no local judge can hush it up." That night, Ebony finally slept a few hours, exhaustion overtaking her. In the morning, she awoke to news that made her blood run cold. Tiana had been transferred to the county detention center, apparently for her own safety. Ebony's fists clenched. The hearing was set for 2 p.m. Ebony read the text from Geraldine. "They're stalling. They might try to expedite sentencing. We have to present the footage immediately." Ebony wasted no time. By noon, she was at the county courthouse, flanked by Simone and Braddock. The place buzzed with tension. She clutched a flash drive with the dashcam video, intending to hand it to the presiding judge, who wasn't Judge Langsley but a different name she hadn't heard, possibly a last-minute substitution. Ebony's instincts flared. Was this a trick? They stepped into the corridor leading to the courtroom. A bailiff blocked Ebony's path. "What's your business here?" Ebony bristled but kept calm. "I'm Ebony Hayes, aunt to Tiana Hayes. I'm here with counsel and evidence." The bailiff hesitated, then let them pass. Inside the courtroom, Ebony found Geraldine waiting near the defense table, a fierce expression on her face. "Ms. Hayes," she said quietly, "the judge is some fill-in from out of town. Let's hope we get a fair hearing." Ebony nodded, scanning the room. She spotted Sergeant Harmon near the front, arms crossed, an arrogant tilt to his chin. 2 other officers she recognized from the dash cam stood behind him. Ebony's gaze iced over. She refused to be intimidated. The judge, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, entered. The hearing began. Tiana was brought in, wearing a standard orange jumpsuit. She looked exhausted, bruises still visible. Ebony fought the urge to rush forward. Geraldine calmly presented a motion to dismiss charges, citing new evidence. The prosecutor, smirking, tried to block it. Then Ebony watched as Geraldine slid the flash drive across to the judge's clerk. Ebony held her breath. The judge inserted the drive into a laptop on her bench, leaning close to watch. The prosecutor stiffened. Harmon's face darkened. The courtroom felt charged with electricity as the judge's eyes widened at the footage. She turned to glare at the prosecutor. "Is this real? Are these your officers?" The prosecutor tried stammering something about probable cause, but the judge shut him down. "I'm seeing an unarmed minor physically assaulted and battered. She's not resisting, not threatening. The officer's language is abusive. This is beyond disturbing." The judge's voice rose. "Sergeant Harmon, approach the bench." Harmon stepped forward, his composure cracking. Ebony watched in grim satisfaction as the judge peppered him with questions. He offered half-lies, claiming the footage was manipulated. The suspect had threatened them first. The judge demanded to see the unedited file, which Ebony's drive contained. The timestamps matched. The audio was consistent. The judge's outrage was palpable. "I will not allow such misconduct in my courtroom," she declared. "Ms. Hayes, I'm ordering your immediate release pending a thorough investigation. The charges against you are vacated." Tiana gasped, tears bursting from her eyes as the bailiff uncuffed her. Ebony sagged with relief, then stepped forward as Tiana rushed into her arms. Ebony whispered, "You're safe now, I've got you." Tiana sobbed into Ebony's shoulder. Harmon blanched, pivoting with a snarl. Ebony shot him a cold look. She half expected him to draw a weapon, but the courtroom was too public. Cameras flashed, local reporters, alerted by Ebony and Darius, were there, snapping shots. Harmon retreated, an ominous gleam in his eyes, as though promising retribution. Ebony held Tiana tighter. Geraldine beamed. "We did it. But watch your back. These people won't let it go." Ebony nodded. She guided Tiana out. They were swarmed by reporters, with Darius at the forefront, microphone in hand. He gave Ebony a meaningful look. He'd do his part to expose the entire scandal. Ebony raised a hand, telling them she'd make a statement later. Right now, Tiana needed rest and medical attention. Back at the safe house that evening, Ebony, Tiana, Simone, Braddock, and Reed regrouped. Tiana clung to Ebony's arm, relief etched on her face, but Ebony could see the trauma there. She silently vowed to get her niece therapy, time to heal. Meanwhile, Ebony's phone buzzed with messages from families who'd seen the news coverage, wanting to come forward. Harmon and his corrupt circle wouldn't be able to hide forever. Yet Ebony knew the fight was far from over. The men who broke into Simone's place, the private contractor angle, the suspicious judges and city officials. There was still a nest of vipers to root out. Ebony planned to coordinate with the handful of honest local detectives, plus that state-level official Braddock mentioned. But she also sensed this wasn't a small local ring. Others had a stake in keeping Milburn under their thumb. The next day, Ebony accompanied Tiana to a local clinic for a full checkup. She wanted the injuries documented by an impartial doctor. The local station, under mounting public pressure, had quietly suspended Harmon pending an internal investigation. Ebony stifled a mirthless laugh at the notion. Internal investigations rarely ended with real punishment. But that was before the dashcam footage. When Ebony returned Tiana to Simone's custody, she found a note pinned to the warehouse door. "Leave or die." Ebony tore it down, heartbeat pounding. She cursed under her breath. The blowback was ramping up as expected. She stashed Tiana somewhere safer, a friend's farm outside city limits, well guarded. Ebony wouldn't risk her niece again. That evening, Ebony decided it was time to address the public. She arranged a small press conference in front of the diner where Tiana was arrested, inviting Darius and other local reporters. The diner's owner, outraged by the footage, agreed to let Ebony speak on the property. A small crowd gathered, a mixture of curious locals, supporters from the community, and a few scowling men Ebony suspected were plainclothes cops or hired muscle. Standing on the steps of the diner, Ebony recounted Tiana's story. "My niece was assaulted, her rights trampled by those sworn to protect us. And she's not the only one. Over the past year, dozens have suffered the same fate." She pointed to the pages of data she'd printed. "These records show a pattern of abuse, fabricated evidence, bribery, intimidation. It ends now. I stand with the people of Milburn who demand real justice." The crowd murmured, some cheering, some silent in fear. Ebony could feel eyes on her, some sympathetic, some hostile. She gazed into the cameras. "I may be a veteran, a trained soldier, but this isn't about me. It's about every family forced to kneel under corruption." After she finished, Ebony stepped down. Simone and Tiana hovered nearby. Darius began fielding questions. The mood was electric. That's when Ebony caught movement on the periphery, a figure stepping from a parked car, raising a weapon. Ebony's reflexes screamed. She lunged, grabbing Tiana and shoving her behind a nearby bench. A split second later, a shot cracked the air. Screams erupted. Ebony wrenched her pistol free, scanning the direction of the muzzle flash. Instinct honed from years of combat guided her aim. The gunman wore a hooded jacket, face partially concealed. He was already sprinting away after firing one shot that whizzed past Ebony's shoulder. Ebony gave chase, weaving through the crowd. She glimpsed Simone crouched over someone on the ground. Had someone been hit? Ebony's fury blazed. She pursued the hooded man around the corner. He vaulted a low fence, but Ebony was faster, leaping over. He spun, trying to take aim, but Ebony fired once, catching his shoulder. He collapsed with a grunt, the weapon clattering. Ebony kicked it away, pinning him. She ripped back his hood, revealing a pale young face, etched with rage. He spat blood. You think you can destroy our system? You have no idea how high this goes, how many are behind us. Ebony glared. Who's us? He laughed bitterly, refusing to speak further. Sirens wailed. Ebony's mind spun. She crouched, close, voice tight. If you don't talk, you'll take the full fall. Meanwhile, your bosses keep profiting. He scowled, pressing his lips together. Ebony realized he'd do anything to avoid naming names. Police cars screeched to a stop. Ebony recognized a few uniforms who might not be corrupt. She raised her hands, announcing she'd disarmed the shooter. The officers approached warily, one calling for an ambulance. Ebony let them cuff the assailant. Meanwhile, Ebony's heart hammered, recalling Simone's urgent crouch over someone back at the diner. Who got hit? One officer shrugged. Paramedics are on the scene, not sure. Possibly a reporter. Ebony ran back toward the diner, dread twisting her stomach. Through the crowd, she saw Simone administering first aid to a fallen man. Ebony realized it was Darius Knight. He lay pale, blood seeping through his shirt. Ebony knelt beside Simone. How bad? Simone's face was grim. Chest wound. He's stable for now, but he needs a hospital stat. Ambulance sirens grew louder. Ebony gently gripped Darius's hand. His eyes fluttered open. Don't let him bury the story, he rasped. I won't, Ebony said, voice tight with emotion. Just hang on. She watched paramedics load Darius onto a stretcher. Tiana, trembling, clung to Ebony's side. The day had taken a horrifying turn. The vile system Ebony fought had just escalated. Now Ebony had to fear for the lives of everyone involved, especially Tiana and Simone. The next hours blurred. Ebony gave a statement to the responding officers, emphasizing the assassin's shot nearly took out a teenage girl, that Darius was wounded, the shooter was in custody. Ebony hoped that might break the ring's confidence, but Ebony also knew they had deeper pockets, deeper connections. The real puppet masters wouldn't flinch at one soldier's arrest. Darius's condition was critical but stable, according to hospital updates. Ebony visited him under heavy police guard, a precaution in case the ring tried to finish the job. Darius, hooked up to IV lines, squeezed Ebony's hand. You have to keep pushing. If we back down, they win. Ebony forced a brave smile. I won't stop. We'll bring them down, but focus on healing. On her way out of the hospital, Ebony was ambushed by local media. Microphones thrust forward, reporters demanding quotes about who shot Darius, speculation about a conspiratorial ring. Ebony gave measured responses, refusing to divulge details that might compromise the ongoing investigation. She ended with a warning. This isn't just about one bad cop. It's about a system that needs cleansing. We have proof, we have support, and we won't be intimidated by violence. That statement aired on local channels. Ebony soon got a call from Colonel Braddock. You're making waves? Are you prepared for the full storm? Bring it, Ebony said. What do you have for me? Braddock explained that the two men Ebony tranquilized at Simone's warehouse were identified as members of a private security firm with ties to a bigger organization known to influence local law enforcement. They specialize in intimidation ops, making problems disappear. I suspect Harmon either hired them or was directed to use them by someone above him. Ebony clenched the phone. So how do we tie them to Harmon legally? We have them in custody at a federal holding facility. They're not talking, but we can match ballistic evidence, phone records if we get warrants. Ebony recognized the big if. Warrants required a judge who wasn't on the take. That might be possible with the momentum from Tiana's exoneration. Ebony said, go for it, build the case. Meanwhile, I'll keep shining the light on them publicly. Careful, Hayes, Braddock warned. They might have plans to escalate further. Ebony's voice was steely. So do I. In the following week, Ebony's revelations triggered small protests outside the police station. Public sentiment started shifting as more victims stepped forward. The newscasts ran segments on the corruption scandal. Ebony ensured Tiana stayed safe, hidden away. Fear still gnawed at Ebony's gut. She knew a cornered animal could be most dangerous. If the ring felt truly threatened, they might attempt something catastrophic. Sure enough, one night, Ebony received a frantic call from Simone, who was at the safe house with Tiana. "We've got multiple vehicles circling," Simone hissed. "They're wearing tactical gear." Ebony swore under her breath. She was downtown, meeting with Braddock about the next legal step. "I'm on my way," Ebony told Simone. She roared away in her truck, Braddock with her. Lights blurred as she sped through empty streets. This was it. The ring was making a direct move to either grab Tiana or kill them all. Ebony's chest pounded. She gripped the wheel, mind spinning through scenarios. They arrived to find bullet casings on the ground near the main gate. Ebony's truck screeched to a halt. She spotted two SUVs with tinted windows, headlights off. Flashes of muzzle fire lit the darkness, a short, controlled burst. Ebony clenched her jaw. She motioned Braddock to circle wide. Ebony slung her personal rifle. Though retired from active duty, she kept her skill honed. From the cover of a stacked crate, Ebony peered into the gloom, searching for targets. She glimpsed figures in black ballistic vests moving around the perimeter, systematically trying to flush out Simone and Tiana. Ebony inhaled, steadied her hands. With lethal grace, she fired a precise round, dropping one attacker with a shot to his thigh. Another attacker spun, firing blindly in Ebony's direction. She ducked, returning a carefully placed shot that shattered the man's rifle. He yelped, diving behind a car. A second wave of gunfire erupted from the opposite side. Ebony's heart tightened. Braddock was engaging them. Ebony used the distraction to move forward, hugging the building's wall. She whispered into her earpiece, "Simone, talk to me." Simone's shaky voice responded, "We're in the back office. I barricaded the door. Tiana's safe for the moment." "Stay put," Ebony ordered. Then Ebony forced her fear aside and advanced, mind calm as an undisturbed lake. In that crystal clarity, Ebony felt the old instincts surge, the unstoppable sniper, reading angles and assessing threats. Another attacker emerged from behind an SUV. Ebony's bullet grazed him, enough to send him scrambling. Ebony pressed the advantage. She dashed to a better vantage point, tracking muzzle flashes from Braddock's side. Two more bodies hit the dirt. In minutes, the firefight ended almost as swiftly as it began. The assailants either lay wounded or had fled. Ebony ran inside, found Simone and Tiana pressed to the floor. They sprang up, relief flooding their faces. Ebony exhaled, tension draining. "You're both okay?" Simone nodded, eyes wet. Tiana threw herself into Ebony's arms. "I thought they were going to kill us." "Not while I'm breathing," Ebony vowed. Outside, Braddock approached, rifle slung. "We've got them scattered. Local authorities are on the way." Ebony realized that for once, calling the local police might not be futile. The tide of public opinion had turned somewhat. Even so, Ebony planned to document every bullet hole, every piece of evidence. These men came with clear intent to harm. It was attempted murder. The ring had escalated to lethal force, revealing their desperation. Sure enough, when the police arrived, Ebony recognized a pair of honest cops she had spoken to previously. They took statements as paramedics arrived for the wounded attackers. Ebony watched them load one man onto a stretcher. She recognized him from photos in the station's corruption files. Ex-military, linked to a shell company funneling bribes to local officials. She stepped aside, letting the police do their job, her eyes flicking to Tiana, who trembled despite Ebony's comforting hand. The next morning, Ebony gave an official statement at the local precinct, accompanied by Geraldine, the lawyer. This time, Ebony and Tiana weren't suspects. They were the victims of an armed attack. The chief of police, a figure Ebony had rarely seen in public, seemed anxious. Ebony guessed he was trying to salvage the department's credibility, and behind his eyes, Ebony sensed fear. A sense that the old regime of corruption might be crumbling. Ebony seized that advantage, pressing him to suspend all officers connected to illegal arrests. Within days, the mayor publicly announced an independent investigation into the entire police force. Ebony suspected that investigation might still be compromised if the bigger fish stepped in, but at least it forced open the door. Meanwhile, Colonel Braddock used his contacts to coordinate with a state-level oversight committee. Ebony learned that certain private prison contracts were now under review, suspected of inflating arrest quotas. Darius Knight's coverage from his hospital bed soared to state headlines. Then, one afternoon, Ebony got a private call from an unlisted number. She answered, hearing a voice she didn't recognize, a low, almost polite drawl. "Ms. Hayes, you've proven your tenacity. But don't be foolish. This is bigger than your niece's beating. People are losing patience. You've turned Milburn into a spectacle." Ebony's jaw clenched. "Who is this?" A small chuckle. "Someone who can end all this. We could make you quite comfortable, Ms. Hayes. Provide restitution, a fresh start, opportunities you've never dreamed. You were a superb operative. We still have use for talents like yours." Her blood ran cold. "You want me to stand down, walk away, and let you keep hurting innocent people? Not a chance." "Think carefully," the voice said. "Your niece's safety isn't guaranteed. Tiana was lucky once. We can't guarantee she'll stay that lucky." The call disconnected. Ebony stared at her phone, rage quivering in her chest. She recognized the hallmark of an old covert structure, the same type of shadow power that had nearly derailed her special operations career. Some influential network pulled the strings. Ebony realized the local corruption in Milburn was but one node in a far-reaching chain, and they were trying to buy her off or threaten her family. Ebony resolved with renewed fire that she would bring them down, even if it meant painting a target on her own back. She gathered Braddock, Simone, and Geraldine. Tiana was outside, practicing a mild self-defense routine Ebony had shown her. Ebony relayed the call. Geraldine's expression was grim. "If they're resorting to direct threats, it means we're over the target." Braddock nodded. "We might want to move Tiana to a federal safe house. I can arrange it." Simone cut in. "Tiana's had enough upheaval. That might traumatize her more." Ebony exhaled. "We don't have many choices. We can't keep living under the gun. She deserves to feel normal again." They reached a compromise. Tiana would stay under watch with a reputable security detail arranged by Braddock, near the city but not in the crosshairs. Ebony planned a final push, a live broadcast or press conference revealing the entire scope of the Ring's operation, not just local but statewide. She asked Darius, still recovering, if he'd co-host. He agreed eagerly. The date was set for Saturday, 1 week away, in front of the county courthouse. During the final days leading up to that event, Ebony braced for retaliation. More tip-offs arrived, suspicious men seen prowling near the safe house, watchers tailing Ebony's truck. She confronted them head-on, sometimes literally stepping out in the street, daring them. They always drove off. Ebony's old sniper instincts kept her ready for a bullet from nowhere. Yet no new ambush materialized. Ebony guessed they were waiting to see if she'd flinch. Saturday arrived bright and clear, a crisp autumn sun overhead. The county courthouse steps filled with local citizens, reporters, and a handful of allied law enforcement officials who wanted to see an end to the corruption. Ebony stood at a hastily assembled podium, microphone angled. Simone and Tiana flanked her, along with Colonel Braddock. Darius Knight, wheelchair-bound, held a second mic. A hush fell as Ebony faced the crowd. She spoke with the quiet intensity of someone who had seen war up close. She detailed the infiltration of Milburn's police, the pattern of extortion, the private prison pipeline. She named names where evidence was ironclad, referencing the dashcam footage, the financial records, the infiltration attempts. Then Darius added testimony of his personal experiences, including the night he was shot. The crowd stirred, some outraged, some disbelieving. Ebony finished with a clear message. "We stand here today not just for Tiana, but for every family that's been torn apart by this organized injustice. No longer will we hide. The entire network behind these crimes is being exposed to state and federal authorities. We will not rest until every individual involved faces accountability. Applause and shouts of support rang out. Ebony scanned the crowd, expecting a bullet or a confrontation. Instead, she saw cameras flashing, watchers taking notes. Some looked angry, some looked hopeful. She felt Tiana's hand slip into hers, trembling. Ebony squeezed back. Whatever happened next, they had forced the issue into the open. The system would either break or be forced to cleanse itself. In the following days, Ebony's revelations sparked a chain reaction. Investigations widened, a special prosecutor was assigned. Several city officials resigned, hoping to avoid charges. A handful were arrested. Sergeant Harmon disappeared, rumored to be on the run. Ebony suspected he'd resurface somewhere, possibly under a new identity, but for now, he was gone, powerless. With the immediate threat eased, Ebony turned her attention to Tiana's healing. She enrolled Tiana in therapy, ensuring she could process the trauma of wrongful imprisonment. Meanwhile, Ebony worked with Simone to form a local advocacy group, pushing for statewide reforms in policing and sentencing. Colonel Braddock returned to his own agenda, but kept occasional contact, confirming that federal leads pointed to larger players beyond Milburn. Late one afternoon, Ebony stood on a hill overlooking the farmland where Tiana now spent quiet evenings practicing archery under Simone's guidance. Ebony held her phone, reading a text from an unknown number. "We're not done. We never will be." Ebony set her jaw. The ring might have been fractured, but she knew it wasn't destroyed. Yet neither was she or her cause. She typed back, "I'll be ready." That evening, Ebony invited Tiana, Simone, and even Braddock to a simple barbecue by the barn. They ate grilled chicken and shared stories, tension easing into cautious optimism. Tiana laughed for the first time in weeks, making Ebony's heart lighten. They deserved a moment of peace after so many nights of fear. But Ebony didn't plan to let her guard down entirely. She had come full circle, a soldier once again, but this time fighting a war at home, for justice rather than clandestine objectives overseas. After Tiana helped Simone clean up, Ebony walked out to the field. The sun dipped behind low hills, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. She gazed at the horizon, remembering her days pinned behind enemy lines, adrenaline fueling every breath. This new battlefield was more personal, more insidious. Corruption didn't wave a flag. It hid in the everyday corners of civic life. Colonel Braddock joined her. "You could walk away now, Hayes. You freed your niece, exposed the scandal. The rest could be handled by the system." Ebony let out a soft laugh. "I tried walking away from war once, but it seems to follow me. Besides, I want to make sure no other kid goes through what Tiana did." He nodded. "You've grown into a leader off the battlefield." She stared at him, half smiling. "Funny, I never wanted to lead. I just wanted to protect those who mattered." "Sometimes, that's what leadership is," Braddock said quietly. "Protecting more than your own." They stood in companionable silence for a moment. Ebony felt the breeze rustle the grass, the last beams of sun warming her skin. Then she turned to him. "We still have names we haven't pursued. The ones financing this. If you have any leads, I'm not done chasing them." Braddock's grin was tinged with respect. "I'll keep you posted. But tonight, let your niece see you smile." Ebony nodded, walking back toward the barn. Tiana was giggling at a silly anecdote Simone was telling. Ebony approached, her heart swelling with gratitude that Tiana was free and healing. Ebony laid a hand gently on her niece's shoulder. Tiana looked up. "Aunt E, you okay?" Ebony forced a playful smirk. "I'm great. Ready to show you how to properly barbecue next time. Simone's cooking might be decent, but I have a few old recipes up my sleeve." Tiana giggled, rolling her eyes. They lingered in that shared warmth, the tenuous calm after a storm. Ebony's phone blinked with new messages. Reporters, activists, potential victims reaching out. She'd spend the rest of the night responding, forging a network to keep the pressure on local corruption. But she didn't mind. She wasn't alone. She had allies, a community awakening to injustice, and the unstoppable resolve that came from nearly losing what she loved most. In the following weeks, Ebony's life settled into a new rhythm, balancing Tiana's needs with her role as a whistleblower and advocate. She engaged with county committees investigating police misconduct. She supported lawsuits on behalf of the victims. Meanwhile, federal agents, pressed by Colonel Braddock's intel, tracked down certain elusive figures who'd orchestrated the private prison deals. Headlines popped up about high-preference resignations and indictments. Ebenezer read them every morning, a grim satisfaction flickering within. Occasionally, Ebony felt the shadow of her old self, the unstoppable Green Beret sniper trained to end threats from a distance. Part of her still hungered for direct confrontation, for the clarity of a crosshair, but she recognized that the real battlefield was no longer half a world away. It was here, in legislation, in courtrooms, in hearts and minds. If Ebony had to stand watch over her city, over Tiana's future, she'd do it with the same fierce dedication she once gave to her country. One evening, as Ebony walked Tiana home from therapy, her niece looked up with a more serious expression. "Aunt E, do you regret what happened? I mean, if you hadn't fought them, would I still be locked up?" Ebony paused, turning to face Tiana beneath a street lamp. "I regret you got hurt. I regret the fear you had to feel. But do I regret fighting? Never. Because if we didn't stand up, they'd keep hurting people. Sometimes you have to face the darkness head on." Tiana nodded thoughtfully. "I want to do that too someday. Maybe be a lawyer or a journalist who exposes corruption." Ebony smiled, a genuine warm grin. "You'd be great at it, T. You've got courage in your bones." A voice from behind startled them. Ebony whirled, tense, only to see Colonel Braddock stepping into the lamplight. "Apologies," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Didn't mean to spook you. I bring news," Ebony exhaled, letting her pulse settle. "What news?" "Remember that unknown caller who threatened you? We traced the number to an account used by a figure named Jericho Stone. He's a high-level figure pulling strings in multiple states, fueling this pipeline. Stone's rumored to have connections in high offices. He might be the real puppet master behind Milburn's corruption." Ebony's jaw tightened. "So how do we get him?" Braddock hesitated. "It'll be more complicated. He's likely shielded by political allies, but we have a lead on one of his safe sites. If we can gather hard evidence linking Stone to the intimidation squads, the funneling of bribes, then the feds can't ignore it." Ebony steeled herself, a wave of old determination washing over her. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect Tiana and everyone else who's been used as fodder." Braddock gave a tight nod. "I figured you'd say that. Let's plan carefully. Stone's men are ex-special ops. This won't be a walk in the park." And so Ebony faced a new frontier, one even more treacherous. She and Braddock, along with a few trustworthy allies, began laying out a strategy to infiltrate Stone's circle. Ebony's infiltration skills were legendary, yet she also had Tiana to consider. Could she risk leaving her niece vulnerable? Ebony decided Tiana would remain with Simone in a safe environment while Ebony carried out this next mission. Tiana objected, not wanting Ebony to vanish. Ebony explained softly that if they didn't root out the source, the threat would never truly end. The night before Ebony was to leave for a reconnaissance trip near Stone's rumored hideout, she and Tiana sat together on a small porch swing. The moon painted the fields in pale silver. Tiana leaned against Ebony's shoulder. "Do you ever get scared?" Tiana whispered. "All the time," Ebony admitted. "Courage isn't living without fear. It's moving forward despite it." Tiana was quiet for a long moment, then said, "You taught me that." Ebony kissed Tiana's forehead. "And I'll keep reminding you, because you're braver than you know." They swung in silence, cherishing the moment. The next day, Ebony departed with Braddock. She had come a long way from the woman who first snuck into Milburn Station that dark morning. She was no longer a lone sniper on a personal vendetta. She was a guardian of her family, her city, and now potentially countless others under Stone's oppressive influence. Tiana waved from the dusty drive, tears in her eyes but chin held high. Ebony waved back, forcing a confident smile. She'd be back, one way or another. She refused to break her promise of a safer world for Tiana. In the months that followed, Ebony's infiltration of Stone's operation took her across state lines, collecting damning evidence of a far-reaching conspiracy. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that Millburn was just one of many small towns exploited. Ebony worked with federal agents, bridging the gap between clandestine fieldwork and official legal channels. She used her specialized skill set for infiltration, recon, intelligence gathering, only unleashing lethal force if cornered. Colonel Braddock orchestrated the bigger picture, ensuring Ebony's evidence got into the right hands. Back in Millburn, Simone and Tiana continued the community activism Ebony had sparked. They set up a foundation to support families harmed by wrongful arrests, coordinating with the newly reformed police leadership for better oversight. Tiana started volunteering to help younger teens understand their rights. She was forging her own path to ensure what happened to her never happened again. Finally, after a year of investigations, raids, and sealed indictments, the Department of Justice unmasked Jericho Stone in a massive press conference. Federal marshals escorted him out of a lavish mansion in handcuffs, cameras capturing every angle. Ebony watched from a discreet vantage, wearing a plain jacket, hood up. She felt a profound sense of completion, but it was bittersweet. Stone's empire had collapsed, but Ebony knew the struggle against corruption never truly ended. There would be others, always. She drove back to Millburn unannounced, yearning for the comfort of her niece's hug. She found Tiana at Simone's clinic, helping with records. The moment Ebony stepped through the door, Tiana gasped in delight, running to throw her arms around Ebony's waist. Ebony closed her eyes, breathing in the familiarity of home. Simone hovered, tears in her eyes. "You did it, EJ. The big fish is caught." Ebony nodded. For now. She looked at Tiana, brushing a stray lock of hair from her niece's face. But it's a start. That evening, they gathered at the diner where Tiana's nightmare began. Now the place was cheerful, customers chatting freely, the sense of dread gone. Ebony, Tiana, Simone, and even Colonel Braddock, who had dropped by to finalize some paperwork with Ebony, took a booth in the corner. They shared a meal, each clinging to an undercurrent of relief. The waitress recognized Ebony from the news and insisted the meal was on the house. Ebony tried to pay anyway, but the diner refused. "You saved this town, Ms. Hayes," the manager said gratefully. Ebony murmured a quiet thanks. She turned to Tiana with a small smile. "We saved it. Together," Ebony corrected. Later, as dusk settled and the neon sign in the diner's window flickered, Ebony and Tiana strolled down the sidewalk. Tiana kept glancing up at Ebony, something unspoken in her eyes. "Aunt E," she finally said, "I'm proud of you. And I want you to know I'm proud to be a Hayes, too." Ebony felt tears prick. She swallowed hard. "I'm proud of you, T. You faced fear head-on and came out stronger." She paused, gazing at Tiana's serious face in the half-light. "You have your whole future ahead. I promise, no matter what threats are out there, you'll never face them alone." Tiana nodded, her voice trembling. "I know. And when I'm old enough, I'll stand beside you." They hugged under the soft glow of the street lamp. Ebony realized that even though her sniper days had shaped who she was, it was Tiana's future that shaped who she chose to be now. A protector, a warrior for justice, not just a weapon. And in that recognition, Ebony found a deeper purpose than any mission she'd ever carried out overseas. In the following months, Ebony settled into a quieter life in Millburn, though quiet was relative. She helped restructure the local police accountability board, occasionally traveling to speak at conferences on corruption and reform. The Hayes name became a symbol of resilience, of fighting back against institutional rot. Tiana resumed a relatively normal teenage existence. School, hobbies, volunteering. She still carried scars, emotional and physical, but Ebony guided her gently, ensuring Tiana's self-confidence blossomed. They shared laughter, tears, and the small joys of everyday life that Ebony had once taken for granted. Occasionally, Ebony's phone rang with cryptic hints of new injustices. She responded selectively, picking battles that aligned with her moral compass. She stayed in close contact with Simone, who expanded her free clinic. Colonel Braddock occasionally visited, each time remarking how Ebony had found a new calling that put her lethal skills to a different kind of use. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ebony and Tiana strolled down Main Street, now vibrant with local vendors. Families bustled. A few folks recognized Ebony, nodding in respect. Tiana sipped on a hot chocolate. They passed a newly erected plaque honoring citizens who had fought corruption. Ebony paused to read it. Tiana brushed her arm. They should have put your name on it. Ebony smiled softly. I don't need it. This plaque is for everyone who stood up, not just me. Tiana gazed at Ebony with admiration. You always taught me that a real hero doesn't fight for glory. Ebony ruffled Tiana's hair. Who said I was a hero? I'm just a soldier trying to protect her family. You're both, Tiana said firmly, and maybe Tiana was right. In stepping out of the shadows and into the messy realm of public accountability, Ebony had become something more than the lethal sniper known only in black ops circles. She was a guardian of her community, a champion for those who felt voiceless. The war at home was not waged with airstrikes or sabotage, but with evidence, testimonies, and unyielding courage. Ebony took Tiana's hand as they continued walking. The day was bright with possibility. Milburn still had scars from years of corruption, but it was healing. Ebony felt a sense of peace blossoming inside her, peace she once thought impossible outside a battlefield. Now, the only battle that truly mattered was ensuring Tiana grew up free from fear. As the sun dipped low, they returned to the modest home Ebony had rented, warm light spilling across the porch. Tiana curled up with a school book while Ebony gazed over at the horizon. Her phone buzzed with a text from a number she recognized, Colonel Braddock, updating her on the final sentencing for Jericho Stone. Ebony read it and felt a quiet satisfaction. Stone would spend decades behind bars, his entire empire confiscated. Ebony slipped the phone away, stepping onto the porch. She inhaled the cool air, thinking of the road that had brought her here. The corrupt cops, the city officials, the unscrupulous private security firms. They had all tried to break her or buy her, but Ebony Hayes was unbreakable. She was a black woman from a lineage of proud Americans, a soldier who had seen war's darkest corners, a sniper whose bullet never wavered when aimed at oppression, and most importantly, she was an aunt, a guardian, a symbol that no badge or bribe could silence. Standing there, Ebony smiled to herself. She'd faced nightmares on foreign soil, but the real test of courage was standing up to evil at home. Now, Tiana dozed inside, safe and free to shape her future. The system was far from perfect, but Ebony had proved it could be fought, and that sometimes, the greatest threat to injustice is one unstoppable soldier with enough love in her heart to take on the world. In the hush of twilight, Ebony reached for the door, glancing back at the setting sun. A gentle breeze ruffled her close-cropped hair. She closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer of thanks that Tiana was alive, that Milburn was healing, and that hope still burned brighter than any bullet's muzzle flash. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Ebony Hayes would meet them head-on, guided by the unwavering principles she'd discovered. Freedom is earned, not handed down, and no child should face the kind of terror Tiana did. Not while Ebony still had the strength to protect them. And so ended one chapter of Ebony's story. But the fight for justice was far from finished. She would remain vigilant, forging alliances with honest officials and community leaders, ensuring that the old rot never again took root. Perhaps, in the grand scheme, she was just one voice, but Ebony Hayes knew better than anyone that a single, well-placed shot could topple an empire. Sometimes, the battles that define us aren't fought in deserts or jungles. They're waged in quiet American towns, where badges can become weapons and law can turn to tyranny. But when people unite, when a single unstoppable soul refuses to surrender, change becomes inevitable. Ebony's journey reminds us that no system is so corrupt it cannot be challenged, that the greatest acts of heroism might not be feats of physical prowess alone, but also moral courage in the face of overwhelming power. We learn that love can propel us to risk everything. Ebony never set out to become a champion of a city, she only wanted to save her niece. Yet in doing so she saved countless others, exposing the ugly underbelly of institutional abuse. We learn that justice is rarely handed to us. It's seized by those willing to sacrifice, to stand firm even when the nights are darkest. And we learn that redemption is possible, for a city, for a community, even for individuals who awaken to their conscience. Above all, Ebony's story underscores a simple, profound truth. The measure of real bravery isn't found in medals or rank. It's found in protecting the innocent, in speaking out for the voiceless, in daring to believe that we can topple giants with enough grit and determination. Hers is a tale of unstoppable resolve, of a soldier who discovered that the hardest war to fight is often the one closest to home, but also the most important. May we all find that courage when our moment arrives.